Before we move to the next item, our guest speaker, Dr. Carpenter, Vice Chair Bell has requested an opportunity to say a few words, and so I'm pleased to recognize Vice Chair Bell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Carpenter, we are extremely grateful that you accepted Commissioner's invitation to testify this afternoon. For months, we've been listening to our ratepayers weigh in on WSSC's proposed implementation of automated meter infrastructure, AMI, also known as smart meters. Some have raised serious concerns regarding health risks associated with radio frequency radiation emitted from smart meters. We have heard from an expert hired by WSSC, Dr. Lika Heifetz, that any potential harm from such frequencies is no greater than that caused by a cup of coffee. However, we understand that there is another side of this debate, and that's why you're here today. Thank you for giving so freely of your valuable time today and sharing with us your expertise on this subject. We're anxious to hear your thoughts on this important issue.
Thanks, Vice Chair Bell. I am pleased now to recognize Dr. David O. Carpenter, the director of the University of Albany's Institute for Health and the Environment, to present his remarks. And he will have a PowerPoint presentation that's been provided in our advanced materials. Commissioners may ask questions at any time during the presentation or afterwards. Dr. Carpenter, welcome.
I'm grateful for this invitation because I lived in Montgomery County for 15 years, so this is almost like talking to my old neighbors. So let's go to the next slide. So a little about myself. I'm a public health physician. I went to Harvard College and Harvard Medical School, then practiced public health and research. So I was first at NIH, and then I moved across the street to the Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute, where I first became involved in the study of electromagnetic field effects. I then was recruited to be the director of the New York State Health Department laboratories, and one of my responsibilities there was to administer a research program on health effects of magnetic fields from electricity. And after that program ended, I was a spokesperson for New York State on the whole issue of electromagnetic fields. I then moved to the university, became the dean of the School of Public Health, and then finally stepped down from that to my present position as director of the Institute for Health and the Environment, which is a collaborating center of the World Health Organization. And the next slide, please. So just to show the electromagnetic spectrum, which probably most of you know about, but nevertheless, it's good to review. Electromagnetic waves are packages of energy that have no mass. So they're basically sine waves with information superimposed on the sine waves. The part that we all know best is the visible light, which is in the colored section on this diagram. And the reason we can distinguish red from blue is that our eyes are sensitive to the wavelength. So the electromagnetic waves vary enormously in wavelength. At the left end, at the very low end, we have the 60 hertz that's associated with electricity. At the very high end, we have the ionizing component of the electromagnetic spectrum. That's X-rays, gamma rays, cosmic rays. And then sort of a third of the way on the left, there's the radio electronic waves or the radio frequency waves. These are the frequencies that are used for radio, for television, for Wi-Fi, for smart meters, for radar. And then slightly above that in the gigahertz range, this is the 5G range that we're moving to. So the issue really is that we know that the ionizing part of the spectrum is very dangerous to human health. The question is, life on Earth wouldn't be possible without visible light or without the infrared radiation that heats the Earth with the electromagnetic waves coming from the sun. So are there significant health hazards associated with lower frequencies? Could we go to the next slide, please? So I've already said this, these are the communication frequencies. Anything that uses wireless is using radio frequency fields to communicate between a generator and a receiver. And that's what AMI smart meters are. Driverless automobiles will use electromagnetic fields for navigation. I have some real concern about the exposures that's going to be associated with this, but we'll see as that develops. Obviously, a microwave oven uses radio frequency radiations, and the fact that you can cook your potato in a microwave oven is proof that there are biological effects from these frequencies. So the issue is the intensity. The next slide, please. Now, in the US, it's the FCC that has the responsibility for regulating all of these wireless devices that we are all exposed to. I visited the FCC a couple of years ago, found that all of the members come from the industry. They have absolutely no health expertise, and they have the fallacious assumption that there is no adverse health effect of radio frequency radiation exposure unless it causes tissue heating. So when you use your cell phone and hold it to your head, the intensity of the receiving RF and the emitting RF is set by the FCC, so it should not cause your ear and your head to heat. Now, the problem is that there are just thousands of scientific studies that show clear adverse health effects at much lower intensities than those that cause tissue heating. Now, let me be very clear. An AMI meter will not exceed the FCC guidelines. However, AMI meters cause significant adverse health effects, at least in some people. The next slide, please. Now, let me talk about the overall picture of radio frequency radiation and health effects. The strongest evidence comes from study of people that have used cell phones intensely for long periods of time. There is just, in my judgment, overwhelming evidence that the risk of developing brain tumors, especially gliomas and glioblastomas, on the side of the head where a person normally uses their cell phone, that evidence is very strong. Just think about the people we know that have recently died of glioblastomas. Ted Kennedy, Joe Biden, John McCain, numerous others. Now, I don't know that all these people use their cell phones a lot, but I wouldn't be a bit surprised if they did. There is another tumor, it's not really a cancer, that's well documented to result in people that use cell phones a lot, and that's called an acoustic neuroma. It's a tumor of the Schwann cells, the cells that provide the insulation around nerves. And since the auditory nerve is a bony canal, it causes serious disease and requires surgery. There's emerging evidence that cancer of other organs in the face, like the parotid gland, which is a salivary gland that's in your cheek, the thyroid gland, which is in your neck and throat, these are also elevated in people that use cell phones held to their head often. There are beginning reports that women that put an active cell phone in their bra have an elevated risk of breast cancer. And I was actually quite horrified to see my daughter, who's a horse reproduction veterinarian, put her active cell phone in her bra. She says, well, I need both hands, I need my phone nearby, and that's a convenient place. I gave her the publications that report that women that do that for periods of time are at elevated risk of developing breast cancer. Next slide, please. So the position that's taken by a number of organizations, including the FCC, and a number of international organizations, particularly the International Commission for Non-Ionizing Radiation Protection, which is a self-appointed body that has undue influence on governments around the world, they make the assumption that these radio frequency fields do not penetrate the body. I'm showing you some slides of a study done by Dr. Volkow, who's the director of one of the NIH institutes. And what she was able to do, and I've actually done this when I was working in Bethesda, there's a form of glucose. Glucose is the energy form that the brain uses, unlike some of the other organs in the body. There's a form of glucose that can't be metabolized, so it can accumulate when the neurons are metabolically active. So on the right, you have a person that has a cell phone held to their head, but the cell phone is turned off. On the left, the cell phone is held to the head. It's turned on, but it's muted, so there's no sound. And what you see is the increase in the red color is an indication that the metabolism of the brain is increased, even though there's no sound, just from the radio frequency radiation that is penetrating into the brain from holding that cell phone to your head. So the idea that this radiation doesn't penetrate the body, doesn't alter physiologic function, is just absolute nonsense. There's overwhelming evidence that that is simply not true. Nevertheless, that's the basis on which our FCC makes standards for human protection. Next slide, please. Now, I don't mean to say that that changes in metabolism are the cause of brain cancer, but nevertheless, that is a clear evidence that the brain responds to radio frequency radiation. Now, the International Agency for Research on Cancer, which is part of the World Health Organization, a few years ago rated radio frequency radiation as a possible human carcinogen. And they did that because at that time there wasn't clear evidence from animal studies that animals developed brain cancer or swan cell cancers. Well, that's all changed. 2 years ago, the National Toxicology Program, which operates through the National Institute of Environmental Health Science, published the results of a 2-year study where rats were exposed to whole body cell phone intensity electromagnetic fields. What they found is an increase in schwannomas, in this case of the heart. It wasn't just the rats weren't on a cell phone, their whole body was irradiated. And they found elevations in malignant gliomas in the brain, but they also found tumors of the pituitary gland and of the adrenal cortex. They also demonstrated direct DNA damage. Now, we know that cancer results from DNA damage, so all of the components are here. A year later, the Ramazzini Institute in Italy did a similar study, but they modeled the intensity of the radio frequency radiation to be like that you would get if you lived near a cell tower. This is less than 1/10 the intensity that was used in the National Toxicology Program, and they found exactly the same results. Increases in swan cell tumors, increases in gliomas in the brain, even at that lower exposure. Next slide, please. Now, there are other effects. I don't have the time to go into them in great detail. There are reproductive harm, especially reduction in fertility in men. There's some effects on brain function, and I'll soon get to the electrohypersensitivity. Let's move to the next slide, please. This is radiofrequency radiation and male fertility. A number of studies on isolated sperm, but most significantly, studies showing that men that carry their mobile phone in their trousers are going to be having reduced sperm counts. I facetiously sometimes say that a man that uses a wireless laptop in his lap for multiple hours a day probably doesn't need to wear a condom for the rest of the week. The next slide, please. Electrohypersensitivity is really the big concern we have around AMI smart meters. This is a syndrome called idiopathic environmental intolerance, or sometimes it's called a medically unexplained symptoms. And it's characterized by very non-specific symptoms that can still be debilitating: fatigue, headache, weakness, memory impairment, sleep disturbances, and a general feeling of ill health. And it often coexists with some of these other syndromes like chronic fatigue, multiple chemical sensitivity. I've studied Gulf War illness, actually a study that was done in Annapolis. So these disorders have only recently been really accepted by the medical profession as being real diseases. In the past, because the symptoms are so nonspecific, physicians would usually refer people that have these symptoms to a psychiatrist. But they're very real. Next slide, please. This has actually been around for a long time. The Soviets had much more stringent regulations than we have in the West. And then the next slide, back in the good old Cold War days, the Soviets irradiated the U.S. Embassy in Moscow with microwaves. And this got everybody very upset because everybody thought that they must know something we didn't. Congress ordered an immediate study to see if there was elevations in cancer, and they didn't find any, which is not surprising, since cancer has a long latency. But many people developed microwave sickness, consisting of headaches, insomnia, irritability, emotional lability, and that's what we see today as electrohypersensitivity. Next slide, please. Now, I've been involved in a number of studies. I actually reviewed old studies of U.S. service personnel that were unintentionally exposed to excessive radar. And this is just statements from two reports from the 80s and 90s about young active men that were exposed to high radar for a brief period of time and then followed for periods of time. So in the Schilling paper, 4 of the 6 people developed full electrohypersensitivity. They had no improvement over 3 to 4 years of follow-up, and headache, loss of stamina, malaise, and lassitude were their major symptoms. Next slide, please. Now, just to show diagrammatically what smart meters are. So you have meters at each house. They generate a radio frequency signal that goes to a central utility pole, collects information from the neighborhood, that goes to a repeater tower, and ultimately goes to the utility. And so the utility can monitor, in this case, water usage, or for an electric meter, it's electricity usage, without having to have someone go around and read the meter. Next slide. Now, I have a colleague in California who is an unusual person because he has a PhD in physics and an MD degree as well. His name is Carl Merrick. And he took these readings from smart meters. Now, these were not water smart meters, but the electric smart meters. And what you see around smart meters is that they give extremely intense pulses that are extremely brief. So it's not this sine wave I showed you earlier. In this case, there were 12,000 pulses per day, and this is measurements 4 feet from the smart meter. The next slide shows, again, some meters that Carl took. This is a smart meter 8 feet away from the meter. That's relevant to the discussion you just had about where these meters are placed relative to homes and also the sidewalk. One of the questions I got in advance was, how far away from these meters do you have to be not to be affected by the signal? I think these signals do fall off quite rapidly with distance, no question about that. But this is at 8 feet on the left, and you see significant intensities. I think in general, most people that can do these measurements, which I cannot do because I'm not the technician for the monitoring, but most people would say that 20 feet is probably a distance for which there would be minimal or no impact from the generation of a smart meter. But you're talking about putting meters at the edge of the property line. Well, some people's homes are certainly closer than 8 feet to the property line. And if you have people walking down the sidewalk where there's a smart meter in front of every house, anybody walking down the sidewalk is going to be exposed continuously to these pulses. Now, next slide, please. There is, I must say, it's really anecdotal evidence, but it's quite strong that the smart meters cause much more symptomatic development than other forms of radio frequency radiation, including cell phones, actually. What we think is the reason is these very brief but extremely intense pulses. So, as I said, this is not a sine wave. What you have on the right side is the analog signal. It goes up and down. But what you have from a smart meter is very, very intense, but very, very brief pulses, 1,000 microwatts per square meter. And there seems to be something particularly dangerous about these in terms of triggering these symptoms. I've met people who were out of their house when a smart meter was put on their house. And then they came home after coming back from vacation, couldn't understand why both the man and his wife were feeling ill. Then they discovered a smart meter had been added. When the smart meter was removed, they recovered. Next slide, please. I must certainly admit that the rigorous science in this issue is not complete, and it's extremely difficult to study. One of the very convincing studies is this one. This is a study that was published in this scientific journal on a woman physician that was very sensitive to radio frequency fields. And she agreed to go into the hospital. This was done at LSU in Shreveport, Louisiana. And she was either exposed or not exposed to these fields. And she reported then if she felt ill or didn't feel ill. And what she found is that she could identify, because of headaches and other symptoms, and also abnormal heartbeats, when she was exposed. But the fact that triggered the greatest increase in her symptoms was the on and the off of the exposure. And that's consistent with what we think is what makes smart meters so particularly dangerous. Next slide, please. Well, there are a number of medical organizations. This is the American Academy of Environmental Medicine, the American Academy of Pediatrics is another, that recommend that certainly not everybody is sensitive to this, or at least not everybody knows they're sensitive to it, but individuals that are sensitive can be very disabled by being exposed to excessive radio frequency radiation. And again, as I said, particularly from smart meters. The next slide, please. This is a survey done. Now, of course, surveys after smart meters are put in, they're vulnerable to bias. I'm very aware of that. But you see that after the smart meters were put in these homes of people in California, almost half of them had problems sleeping. Almost half of them had elevated stress and anxiety. 40% had elevated headaches. 38% had ringing in their ears. That's actually a very common symptom. Some people show cardiac arrhythmias and palpitations. The next slide, please. This I took from the website that your company has. And it was very interesting for me to listen to the last discussion that you've had. This is what they say, how the consumers will benefit. Well, they'll be able to look at real-time access to their water usage and recognize if they have leaks. Well, baloney. Nobody is going to do that. And they have to have an informational portal to do that. look at the additional thing. An additional benefit is a decrease in the WSSC's water carbon footprint by reducing the number of trucks we have on the road. It isn't just the trucks, it's the people that drive the trucks and that are going to read the meters that are going to be fired. There is no benefit to the consumer. There is only benefit to the utility. They are certainly going to fire the meter readers. Now, maybe as those people that you just had said, they would reassign meter readers to some other job, but they are going to reduce their workforce. You're going to reduce jobs by installing AMI water meters in Montgomery and in anywhere in Maryland. Next slide, please. This is my last slide. Electrohypersensitivity is real. Not everybody is electrosensitive, but it's very interesting because there are probably many people that have these symptoms of headaches, of ringing in the ears, of excessive fatigue, that have no understanding of where those symptoms are coming from. Studies from Europe suggest that maybe up to 5, maybe even up to 10% of humans, of adults, are electrosensitive. We're seeing problems with children in schools that are electrosensitive, especially children in schools that have wireless computer labs where you have 20, 30 kids on wireless laptops with one big router, and it's like a mini microwave oven. And some of these children are basically unable to stay in school. There's something about the smart meters signals that makes them particularly provocative. And it's almost certainly the rapid rise and fall, but much more work needs to be done to understand that. The point is, the old digital readers did not generate any electromagnetic fields. You did have to have someone come around and read the meters. Although I'm old enough, so I remember when I was young, we read our own meters. You filled out a postcard and you mailed in the electricity usage to your utility. There's no reason you couldn't do the same thing with water. So the putting in an AMI smart meter for water use does not benefit the consumer. It benefits the utility. They can reduce their employees and their trucks, but it is likely to cause severe incapacitation in a certain percentage of the population. By no means all of the population. Unfortunately, I'm not electrosensitive. But some of these people, like those military people I spoke to you about, once they become electrosensitive, they remain electrosensitive for their life, or at least for many, many years. So many of these electrosensitive people can't use a cell phone. They can't stand to be around a cell tower. They often can't go into a Starbucks or a McDonald's where there's strong Wi-Fi. So they should be protected. Now, I would really question the wisdom of implementing AMI meters in these counties in general, but at very least there should be an opt-out option. I do not think that allowing the utilities to put the AMI meters at the property line is acceptable at all. That means everybody walking down the sidewalk, whether they're electrosensitive or not, is going to be exposed to these signals. So I'll stop there and be happy to answer your questions insofar as I can. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter. Any comments or questions from commissioners?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Carpenter, thank you so much for your testimony. I just want to make a few things clear for our listening audience. Dr. Carpenter, were you compensated in any way by us for your testimony here today?
No, I was not.
Okay. And Dr. Carpenter, do you currently live in either Prince George's County or Montgomery County?
No, I do not. I lived in Montgomery County for 15 years, but I left and moved to New York in 1980, so it's a long time ago.
Okay, and so we can understand what your real interest is here. Could you tell us why you accepted our invitation to appear here today?
Well, I'm a public health physician. You know, public health is it's the part of medicine that tries to prevent disease. And I feel it's my responsibility as a public health person to act on issues that they may still be controversial. There may be a lot of things that are not known, all the T's aren't crossed, the I's are not all dotted. And this is one of those issues. And I certainly don't pretend to say that that everything I said is documented to 100%. I think that it's my duty as a public health physician, when there's an opportunity to inform commissioners, to inform the public, that there is reason to do everything you can to reduce your exposure to a substance that may not be, it may be convenient, it may be useful, but in excess, it causes human health problems. And that's why I accepted this invitation. This is not my major research. My major research is studies of chemicals in human disease. But I was assigned this topic when I first came to New York in the Department of Health. Once you get involved in a controversial subject like this, you always get called on to talk about it. I've never received compensation except travel compensation for issues that I do on this subject. But I feel that it is important and that everybody should be informed about it.
So, Dr. Carpenter, we're told that we have cell phones, we have microwave ovens, we have any number of things in our lives that may be sources of radio frequency radiation. Do we know, or has anyone taken a look at the cumulative effect of being exposed to all of these sources in our daily lives all at once?
Well, that's a very good question. And the short answer is no, because it's almost impossible to measure all of our exposures. Now, the studies that have been done sort of on cell phones, they are looking only at people that hold a cell phone to their head and try to extrapolate how many hours they did that for many years. Obviously, they're exposed to many other things. They're exposed to Wi-Fi, they're exposed to smart meters, they're exposed to GPS. GPS is all electromagnetic fields. So when you can demonstrate that there's an elevation in disease, when you can only identify one small part of our total exposure, you can be absolutely certain that you're totally underestimating the magnitude of the risk. Now, for people that use cell phones, we think the risk of developing these brain cancers is something like 3 or 4-fold greater than someone that doesn't use a cell phone. Now, brain cancer is relatively rare. It's just a tragic cancer when it happens. But we are not able to, in those same people, determine how often, whether they have Wi-Fi in their house, whether they spend a lot of time in places with Wi-Fi, whether they have smart meters. So when you can demonstrate elevation in brain cancer, and you have animal evidence that animals exposed develop brain cancer, you can be pretty certain that if you could quantify total exposure, the risk would be even greater than you find from what you can measure.
Dr. Carpenter, do you know Dr. Lika Heifetz?
I know who she is. I have seen her on occasion. I don't know her personally.
All right. Have you had an opportunity to read the expert report that she prepared for WSSC?
Yes, I did.
All right.
And I disagree quite vehemently with her.
Okay.
I know a lot of her background. She has been employed while she's at UCLA at present. She's been employed by utilities for many, many years. And she has a conflict of interest that is a very major conflict of interest. And in this field particularly, and I have published a paper, it's more on the magnetic fields, but you can look at people's position, and if you look at what they publish and who supported their work, those supported by utilities never find anything. those supported by independent organizations almost always find significant effects. I don't accept Dr. Kiefit's report. It's a whitewash. It's consistent with what she has stated over her career. The things she's published, almost always funded by EPRI or other organizations that have a clear conflict of interest in what the results are.
Dr. Carpenter, I want to direct your attention to one particular, and I guess what we would consider the bottom line to Dr. Heifetz's report. Dr. Heifetz drew an unqualified conclusion when she opined that the exposures to RF from Smartmeter are neither long enough nor strong enough to approach the safety standards set by the FCC and other bodies. Do you agree with that?
I do agree with that. As I said, this exposure, if you average it, does not reach the FCC standard. Well, remember what I said. The FCC standard is tissue heating like you would get in your microwave oven. Nobody has reported that their head gets hot when they're by a smart meter. But the problem is that FCC standard is totally wrong. I'm actually a plaintiff in the suits to the FCC, and I actually have a press conference in 45 minutes on exactly that subject. The FCC does not protect the American public. They ignore the evidence that is overwhelming, including the evidence done by our own government, like the National Toxicology Program. And the problem is those FCC standards do not protect against the kinds of health effects that we see people suffering from exposure to smart meters.
Thank you, Dr. Carpenter.
Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
Just a comment. I think.
Mr. Thompson?
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Carpenter, for the presentation. And thank you, commissioners, for allowing Dr. Carpenter to come and make his presentation. I think we all think that it's really important to have all sides of a particular issue as we're really deliberating on this very important topic. And it's just very helpful for informing us so that we can make some really important and lifelong decisions here. And I just really appreciate the thoroughness with which the presentation was made, but I do appreciate the opportunity to hear all sides of a particular issue before a decision is made. I just think that's really important, and especially a policy making determination. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Well, thank you for your comment.
Thank you. Amen to that. Any other questions or comments from commissioners?
I too just want to echo my colleagues' comments.
Yes,
Thank you for coming and presenting this information to us. It's we always need, as my colleague said, both sides of the story, and you've certainly given us a lot of food for thought with this. So again, thank you.
Thank you.